Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I am proud to welcome you to the premises of Prague University of Economics and Business on the occasion of Annual Conference of Faculty of International Relations 2023. We started this project back in 2014 with the goal of raising debate on Czechia's competitiveness, its future in changing global environment. And I am happy that we continue this tradition also this year, and I am welcoming you again with the 9th volume of our annual conference dedicated to sustainable finance, which means how to take into account ESG considerations when it comes to investment decisions. Our faculty and the school, we both see our important role not only in teaching and research, but also being influential, shaping the public debate within the society, and offering a ground for a balanced, non-partisan discussions, which I think is key for understanding issues that affect our lives nowadays. A year ago, we had a very fruitful discussions and debates on issues related to energy sources as a result of phasing out Russian energy supplies after the invasion of Ukraine. The topic of this conference is linked to EU commitment to become carbon neutral by 2050. This ambition requires a massive transformation of the European economy, particularly in countries such as Czechia, where the economy relies on industry. An active approach and engagement of government, businesses, and society at large scale is needed. On top of this, we all know about the negative and often wrong perception and misinterpretation of the European Green Deal, its contents and its goals. Therefore, raising awareness and communicating issues related to the green transition is crucial. The already mentioned transformation of economy will require heavy investments. Nevertheless, it's not only the state which is obliged to facilitate and assist with decarbonisation. Private funding needs to be employed too. Sustainable finance in EU faces numerous challenges. Firstly, the regulatory framework is complex. The EU Taxonomy, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, including its delegated acts, need to be very precise, and making them comply with international standards is challenging too. Declaring sustainability and providing environmental, social, and governance-related information, both qualitative and quantitative, is important to making informed, sustainable investment decisions. Ensure that companies disclose this data transparently and consistently remains a significant challenge. At the same time, standardized metrics for assessing the environmental, social, and governance-related impact, risks, and opportunities associated with investments need to work on the ground. We all know about greenwashing or social washing as a phenomenon that undermines sustainability. It is needed that regulators ensure that financial institutions adhere to strict standards to prevent such practices. However, it is not easy. In the Czech context, for an economy that relies on industry, it is very much needed that public and private sector together seek a way to make decarbonization happen in an appropriate way. I am not going to elaborate this issue further, because this will be the subject of the conference. And I am very proud that we put together an excellent lineup for our two panels. And I am very happy to welcome our distinguished guests and experts in the field, some of them even our alumni. And last but not least, I would like to express my gratitude to all who worked hard to make this event happen. as well as to our partners, European Commission's representation in Czechia, Hospodářské noviny, and Euroactiv CZ. I wish you fruitful debates, and let's start the conference. Thank you.
Right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to our Dean for opening address, and welcome to the Prague University of Economics and Business for Sustainability in Finance Conference. We're delighted to host you for what we hope will be two very special panels. We aim again at a more regionally focused tilt, which is in our case the Czech perspective, and we would like to see you being engaged in the conversation, and so both panels will close with a Q&A session, where you will have an opportunity to ask questions to our distinguished panelists, and also you could refer to Slido, so you can provide your questions online. We've also wanted this yearly conference to be a space where through debate and we individually and collectively learn and can find better ways to navigate shared challenges towards net zero. I have to say that when exactly 4 years ago I was at my first conference on sustainable finance at G20 environment event in Tokyo, I've never dreamed that in 2023 we will meet in Prague and that this will be an agenda going mainstream in financial world. Now let me please briefly introduce our guests. I will start with Martin. Martin is the head of the Sustainable Finance Unit in the European Commission's Directorate General for Financial Services. He's also the holder of the CFA and FRM designations and member of the CFA Institute and Global Association of Risk Professionals. He holds MA master's degree from Faculty of International Relations, the Prague University of Economics and Business. Zeilina Cross. Linda is the founder and CEO of ISFC, where she oversees its work on sustainability strategies, sustainable investing, and international ESG and standardization efforts. In 2023, Linda was selected as the 2023 Obama Europe leader, and she joined the EU's platform on sustainable finance to advise on the usability of the EU taxonomy and the wider sustainable finance framework. Linda is an alumni of the University of Glasgow, McGill University, and the London School of Economics. Melcher. Ota leads the Economic Transformation Unit at the Ministry of Finance of the Czech Republic. The unit primarily manages the public sector's work on sustainable finance and supports its role in facilitating a transition to a low-carbon economy. Prior to his current position, Ota worked at the Czech mission to the OECD as an economic and financial counselor, covering a wide spectrum of policy areas and interactions. Ota graduated from the Prague University of Economics and Business with a degree in international trade and from the University of London. He holds a PhD degree in international trade from the Prague University of Economics and Business. So thank you all. I think that we can get straight to it. So, Martin, if I turn to you, could you please elaborate and introduce the concept of transition finance? Because we heard a lot about the, let's say, framework for dark green activities and investments, but there is a growing interest in, how in an agenda how to finance transition, so maybe you can elaborate on that concept.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and good afternoon to you all. Before I answer your question on transition finance, let me just recall why we have been working on this agenda for the last 5 years. It's important always to recognize why we are doing something in the European Commission and together with you. The Dean already mentioned that we have ambitious goals. We are lucky enough in Europe to have a European Green Deal, but the European Green Deal is a great agenda, but it's also a very ambitious agenda. And to meet the goals of the European Green Deal, we need a lot of investments. We need a lot of money. And the bulk of this money will have to come from private capital. I mean, there is a lot of public finance already going into sustainable projects, but the bulk, the vast majority of those investments will have to come from private finance. So the whole point of this agenda is to mobilize the power of the private capital. And not only the power of the capital by the financial sector, but also by all of us, by the pensioners and by retail investors, by all of us. Now, we started to work on this back in 2018, and when we asked the financial sector, what is it that is causing a kind of trouble for you if you want to scale up sustainable investment? What are the key obstacles for you to scale up sustainable investment? They have argued there are three things. First, lack of clarity on what is sustainable investment. Second, lack of transparency. And third, lack of appropriate instruments and tools. And they explicitly asked the Commission to develop a policy, develop a framework that would help them to scale up sustainable investment. And this is what we have been doing over the last 5 years. And now I have to say that at the end of this period, I'm now at the end of my kind of mandate in this job, we have delivered everything. Now it's in the hands of the financial sector and in the hands of the companies what they will make out of these tools. And we are, of course, hoping that they will use them. There has been a lot of anxiety about the fact that there was a lot of regulation. Yes, there was some regulation, quite a big one, I have to say, especially in the area of transparency. But we thought that this transparency and introducing obligatory transparency requirements was a necessity. So we do acknowledge the challenges with the implementation, but this transparency is absolutely crucial. And by the way, the latest news that I can share with you that the Parliament just, I think 2 hours ago, adopted, at least they have not rejected the Commission's proposal on the corporate reporting standards. Now, on your question on transition finance, we have so far, with our agenda, focused a lot on defining what is sustainable and on what is aligned with those targets. But we have not done enough work on how to get there and how to help especially those companies that are facing the most significant challenges with transition. So to recognize better the interim steps that companies and the financial sector participants are making on their way towards sustainability. And this is an area that we would like to explore now in coming weeks, months, and years, because this is an area that certainly is more relevant in the Central and East Europe than anything else. I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. A lot of food for thought. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that regulation on EU level is now done. So we are actually glad to hear that. Although we will await still. I mean, like legislative train, right? As you mentioned, is not finalized in all pieces for the framework. Now, maybe if I turn to you, Linda, I would like to, of course, share, like to know your view on this transition efforts. Well, specifically for a Czech perspective, maybe you can also refer to how do you see it from the position of different countries, how they actually are adapting to this framework, how they actually use it, and what bottlenecks do they see?
Thank you. I think it's a very good way of starting. Like, why are we doing it, right? And we're doing it because we have issues with erosion of natural capital on which the economic system relies on, whether it's climate change, biodiversity, etc. And it's true. Even decades ago, the financial sector did complain that we don't have the data, we don't have comparability, what is sustainable, what isn't, what defines an ESG fund. And now we're actually starting to get to understand what it is. And in that sense, taxonomy is one of the tools, and we keep talking and referring to the taxonomy, is extremely useful. Because if people used to say that there's no clear science-based definition of what is sustainable, well, there you go, now there is. And that is also why we see so many other countries globally trying to develop taxonomies. So this is also not just the EU going crazy. It is actually a lot of other countries that see the benefits of having a taxonomy, having a common understanding in the market, so that you can price different assets accordingly. So that actually market can see how companies are growing, whether they are growing in the direction of green or not green. It doesn't mandate what you invest in. We had a conversation earlier this week and even last week with big asset managers globally who are saying that, you know, oh, this is forcing us to do X, Y, Z. It actually doesn't force you to do anything. It's a tool that you can use and adapt to your own strategy and your own risk appetite. And for that, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in terms of what ESG or taxonomy or some of these tools are. And essentially, they are just additional data. And people love data. It helps you see things that you might not have seen before. You can actually identify risk much, much better. Because all of a sudden, you can see where a carbon price can be quite dangerous for your investment portfolio. It also makes you start thinking, what will be the shape of the economy in the next 10 to 20 years? Because we always underestimate how much change happens within a decade. So if you are an institutional investor, for you it's very, very important to make sure that your portfolio is aligned with essentially what might happen in 10 years' time, whether there's going to be more greening or there's going to be more digitalization. You need to make sure that your investments are resilient. And for that, I think some of the policy files provided by the Commission have been invaluable. And you can see that people who actually have looked into it have started using it. And the interesting story here is we hear all the time from SMEs and also other parts of the system saying, oh, there's no data, it's so difficult, we can't do it, it's too burdensome. Well, guess what? It's already happening. And plenty of companies are doing it, even here in Czech Republic, even SMEs. There's an SME that we looked at with my colleague, which actually does fantastic sustainability report. It's looking at how to use taxonomy, how to actually report its capital expenditure. Look at Czech Group. It's already doing taxonomy, it's integrating it into its own data collection internal framework. It will have it all digitalized, it will report, it will be transparent. You can go on the website and check the different taxonomy alignment. So saying that it's not possible, it's impossible until it gets done. And then the question is, well, why bother? What's the upside? There's no upside. Well, the interesting thing is in the last 6 months, people have understood that actually there will be an upside, but it might not be tomorrow, but it might be in a few months. Because already big banks in this region are openly sitting on panel discussions and saying that, well, this is the data that we need. If you don't have any data, we might have to actually reconsider financing you. There couldn't be a starker message. If you can't get a loan or if you can't refinance certain operations, then all of a sudden that is a major risk to the business. And it's something to start actually paying attention to. And one last point, I think there's also been a complaint, oh, but there's no fines. Supervisory authorities are not acting. Well, we actually have worked on a 4-year learning pathway for European Central Bank and SSM, the supervisory authorities, together with Florence School of Banking and Finance. And they've started learning. We're 1 year in, and they have some exciting questions. So it's also the false sense of security that nothing will change, that nobody's getting a slap on the wrist for greenwashing. Well, I think all of those things are starting to change, and actually, we now have the tools, we have the data, we have the understanding to start actually implementing. And that's where it's very crucial that people start actually doing the work. And it's better to develop internal capacities than maybe overly rely on external, because that is expensive. So that's the homework for, I think, companies and financial sector across CE, is actually to invest time and effort and money into understanding and implementation.
Thank you, Linda. I heard a lot of concepts that I hopefully we can cover a bit later. So maybe to give you floor, Ota, as well, on behalf of Minister of Finance, because you lead the Economic Transformation Unit, where I understand that sustainable finance agenda is being centralized. So maybe you can provide us with some insight on behalf of, let's say, public sector perspective, and how you can actually help to private efforts.
Thank you very much for the floor. Welcome from my side too. So a couple of introductory points from my side, and maybe a bit of reactions on what has been stated by my panel colleagues. First, we recently established a unit at the Ministry of Finance that's supposed to the idea is to consolidate and coordinate the agenda of sustainable finance across the public administration. It's maybe an idea that's even more ambitious than the package that the Commission introduced, because it's a really cross-cutting issue. If you look at, for example, the taxonomy regulation, it touches almost all the substantive structural departments of the public administration, and it's difficult to consolidate these in terms of different departments. They have their own agenda. We are facing the challenges of the departmental silos. The communication is not always the best, and it's one of these issues like digitalization, green finance, and this green transition that really necessitates a common effort at the level of the government. So the idea is to have one coordinating body to speak for the public administration. In a policy-making dimension, there are technical level discussions of all these instruments and mechanisms that has been introduced by the European Commission that will still remain at the different departments, but the policy discussions should be coordinated on one place. The unit hopefully will soon be strengthened by additional capacities. I think that the second mic is now working, so I can lay this off. Okay, is that working? Yeah, hopefully. We should have some additional capacity starting from January next year, being able not only to look at the financing instrument of the green transition and sustainable finance, but also at the second pillar of the Green Deal, which are the strategies and its economic impacts. Why this agenda is important for us, for public administration? If you look at the case of decoupling, which is the splitting the two trajectories of emission intensity of Czech Republic and the economic growth, you can see there's a successful case in the last couple of decades where we managed to decouple these two trajectories. It's very important, and we can always show this case to relevant stakeholders. That means we managed to decouple the emission intensity of the economic growth, and it's very important for us because these instruments and tools can be used to further decouple emissions from economic growth. It's also important because of the fact that even when we manage to decouple these two trajectories, the Czech Republic still remains one of the most emission-intensive economies of the European Union, and together with Poland, we really have a massive challenges in front of us in terms of transitioning the energy generation. Here, I mean the electricity and the heat generation. Where the energy mixes are really needs a lot of an effort and strategy that on the level of the government, and that also requires a lot of financing. And the financing, as mentioned by the previous speakers, should come from two channels. One is public, one is private. Here I would like to echo the Dean and previous speakers that we really see the primary importance on the private sector and on the private financial flows. But we would like to kind of show the case and show the way with the public money and use them really effectively in terms of positioning them as a kind of seed money and build some case studies to show the private sector where to go. But again, the emphasis is on the private money because we are really, as a Ministry of Finance, we are really looking, we are taking care of the additional burden that it might epitomize for the budget. Last point that I want to mention, that was mentioned shortly by Linda, for us the international dimension of this effort is really important because, of course, if European Union is adopting legislation like this, there's a
legitimate concerns about productivity and competitiveness if others are not on the same page with their efforts. So we're very happy to see that, you know, United States, Australia, and China, they are working on something that could resemble something as a taxonomy or as a register of environmental conditions that you need to fulfill to be kind of approved or acknowledged in terms of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ota. Before we move into this public and private finance, now maybe Martin, over to you. Maybe can you elaborate on critique from like increased regulatory, so basically cost for reporting requirements on behalf of companies. So basically maybe a more general question like why should actually companies that are either within the scope or outside of the scope, why should they even like be active and bother with this agenda? What would you say?
The whole point of this agenda, to put it simply, is to facilitate access of companies to capital that would make the companies more resilient over time to withstand the risks stemming from climate change and environmental degradation, and also allow them to get better, to improve their environmental performance so that ultimately everyone at the end of 2050 can be carbon neutral. Now, why they should bother? This agenda, first of all, I mean, is regulatory. So yes, indeed, there are regulatory requirements, and those who are captured by the disclosure requirements have to simply report what they are supposed to do. And the point of this regulatory effort is actually to bring a little bit order, because there are already plethora of different templates that financial sector participants are sending to companies, and companies are facing, even in the absence of regulatory initiative, burdens stemming from these different templates. So the whole point is to bring a kind of harmonized, standardized set of minimum set of data that we believe, and the financial sector believe, would help them to move the needle. So that's on the regulatory side. They have to comply because ultimately availability of this information will allow the financial sector to make more informed decisions, and especially about the future. It doesn't matter that much where the company stands today, but the company should in particular articulate and communicate what the company intends to do in the future, for instance, through transition plans, so that the investor who is investing in this company, providing a loan to that company, knows how the company intends to proceed in the transition. Now, the second element of this agenda, and I really would like to underline that, is about opportunities. What companies can do in general, those that are already regulated on transparency, but also those who are not regulated, what they can do proactively to attract capital from the financial sector, from investors, from banks, insurance companies, pension funds, asset managers, etc., to implement projects that will allow them to get better. They would like to invest in a technology that would ultimately make the company more competitive, and the technology would have an environmental performance that would ultimately be more aligned with the sustainability targets. And that will ultimately improve the competitiveness. Now, Daniel, on your point, yes, there are costs. There are always costs with anything new, and the reporting costs and even the companies that will provide some information on a voluntary basis is implying costs. This is a short-term cost. But then provided that this company gets capital from these financial market participants, will be ultimately able to benefit from the medium to long-term benefits of those projects, will ultimately, compared to the international companies that will not maybe provide this information and will have more difficulties to get access to capital, will be in a better position. That's the whole point, that over the medium to long term, the longer term benefits will outweigh, and this is something that we strongly believe in Brussels. I hope that somebody in this room will believe in that as well, will strongly outweigh the short-term costs. Now, we are aware that the short-term costs are still high. We are not underplaying the importance of supporting stakeholders with the compliance with the disclosure requirements, and we are really trying our best to support everyone. But let me again recall that this agenda is not only about regulatory compliance and a check, it's about the opportunities that the companies have in better and having better access to capital, provided that they articulate clearly what they intend to do over time to improve their environmental performance.
Thank you, Martin. So if I again turn to you, Linda, we've heard from Martin that that there are many opportunities. What would you say to a critique often heard on behalf of taxonomy that it's a niche market? Do you see like this happening here and there? And what would be your advice for like voluntary maybe reporting and put in effort into eligibility and alignment reporting on behalf of companies?
Thank you. I'm not sure this one works. I think it's an interesting question also because we are sitting in Czech Republic and most of the businesses are really tied up in supply chains. And I think on a macro level, what we often forget is that even the smallest company sells their stuff to someone. And we are historically, we have been very bad at marrying the macro and micro and the understanding of how you fit into the bigger picture. So the big picture is European Green Deal, asset owners predominantly caring about where their money goes, also wanting to preserve profitability. It's all about money at the end of the day. But also a few, and increasingly so, are very well aware of the social and environmental issues. And with the wealth transfer that we'll see in the next 10 to 20, 30 years, there's going to be more and more pressure from the richest parts of the world that want to invest sustainably. And that's where the opportunity comes from. Because guess what? Now, we've been advising quite a few international investors who are looking for these opportunities to invest. There's more and more venture capital funds and private equity funds that want to give money to businesses that actually have some sort of ESG integration and strategy and do reporting. And if you do it under EU taxonomy alignment, that's the golden standard, right? So that's actually can be used as the tool. And that brings me to my main point that sadly, currently, it all starts with regulation compliance. So companies go, oh, I need to comply. So let's just comply and get on with it. How annoying. We have to spend money on compliance, etc., etc. But the point is, use it. If you've invested, it's actually a good idea. Does it work now? Doesn't seem to. Technical issues. I think that's the most interesting part here is that you can actually use this and leverage it to get more money, to use it for a variety of different strategic goals, for growing your market share, etc. It's not enough just to tick the boxes and be very happy about it, but actually have a 360 view about it and make sure that you use it for your best opportunity and do seek those opportunities out. And I think that's one of the most disappointing things, that people don't see it as an investment. There's a reason why we call mortgage a mortgage and not the greatest debt of your life, because you're investing for a positive outcome many, many years later. Here, the funny thing is it won't even be many, many years. It can be months if you're smart about it. But I think there's a lot of inertia and a lot of misunderstanding of how to use it. We've come across multiple examples, not just in Czech Republic, so don't feel too bad about Czech Republic. You're not alone. We're in it together with other countries across Europe and globally, where companies don't even know what they need or what they want. So that's why they need then advice, or they need investment in their own staff. Because if you actually educate all of your staff, all of a sudden the ideas keep coming up. And that's very interesting to see, because mid-sized companies actually have a greater advantage. You spend much less money in educating your people, because you're not dealing with 70,000 employees. You may be dealing with 200. And then you give them ownership and creativity in some departments. And actually, it's one of the cross-cutting things that can create some very interesting innovation internally. So I think that's some of the interesting ways how people can use not just taxonomy, but the entire framework, actually.
When you mentioned that, that also smallest companies are actually somewhere in the value chain, Sorry about that. So when you mentioned that even the smallest companies are actually included in the value chain, I think that that it's important to stress that 99% of companies are outside of the scope of corporate sustainability reporting nowadays, as it is now. So there is even like some suggestion to increase the thresholds, right, for how we define large entities. So more even than 99% of the sector will fall out of the scope. So I don't know, Martin, if you want to comment on that briefly.
Yes, Daniel, I think that we have to be frank with each other, and this is an area where we have a problem. We have not really been able to resolve it because on purpose, we have excluded SMEs, those you have been talking about, from any regulatory parameter to provide any information. We didn't want to have any burdens or even requirements for them to report on against taxonomy. I mean, that would have been crazy, frankly. So we did that, and by the way, there is no intention of the Commission to change that line. Now, we have a problem because then these companies are not, again, subject to the regulatory perimeter, but they should still be part of the game on sustainable finance. They too should get access to capital. So what we are doing about that, and again, we are not having a perfect solution yet, is that we are developing together with FRAC, which is an entity working on these non-financial reporting standards, on a voluntary reporting standard for SMEs that can use this voluntary template to indicate their ambitions about what they want to do, about their projects that they would like to invest, so that they have better means and better chance to get access to capital from the financial sector and investors that Linda talked about that are very hungry to invest in new projects. So that's the first thing. It will be voluntary. Let me emphasize once again, it will be voluntary. And the benefit of this would be that instead of different banks approaching the SMEs with different templates that I talked about, that there will be a harmonized set of information, very simple, by the way, it should be really simple, that would help the conversation between the banks, the financial sector, and the SMEs. That's the first thing. The second thing that we have to be mindful of is that the large companies that are subject to the reporting and disclosure requirements ultimately also approach the SMEs, right? Because they are in the value chain, so they do ask them, can you tell me, I mean, how you have produced this particular product? So this simplified reporting standard would also help reduce the kind of indirect costs that the SMEs have in any case, irrespective of a direct regulatory impact. Another kind of work strand that we are now exploring together with the platform on sustainable finance is whether, again, I cannot yet talk about it too much formally, but whether we can design a kind of more simple regime for SMEs that would possibly be inspired by taxonomy, but not be the taxonomy in its hardcore with all the criteria that we request from large companies, but that would allow the SMEs to identify opportunities in the different sectors that we have covered by taxonomy: building, manufacturing, transport, you know, the sectors where, by the way, are very important in the Czech Republic as well, so that we give them a possibility to get recognition for the investments that they are making and to get access to capital themselves. And finally, we have also asked the European Banking Authority to develop a possible standard for green loan as something very simple, again, let me emphasize, that the banks would recognize also in their way of reporting to the supervisors when they provide loans to the SMEs, subject that they, again, do something good for green. But again, it would not be necessarily as strict as the European Green Bond Standard, which is, as we know, rather tight. So this is, I mean, these are the different avenues. If there is anyone in the audience who would have some really good ideas, the Commission is reflecting on that. We are not having a perfect solution. I have to be very frank here.
Thank you, Martin. Maybe, Ota, we've heard that on behalf of Czech public sector that you want to lead by example, right? So is that something that, what do you see as main deliverables and timeline for helping private sector to deliver on very ambitious targets, and to follow suit with private sector initiatives, be it on strategic level, or how to overcome some data barriers, anything similar?
Yeah, I'll try through my mic. Yeah, it works. Thanks for the question. It's first, there are very important state-owned enterprises operating in the Czech economy. Some of them are very large facilities in strategic sectors like energy, transport, communications, and these companies, of course, will have to abide their reporting obligations to and trying to get access to the capital. So what we are trying to do, we're trying to talk to different departments who, by whom we kind of control the state or the public stake in the companies, and make sure that they understand the reporting obligations. Some of them, for example, Linda mentioned chess. They are forerunners in these initiatives, companies that are compiling these reports on voluntary basis for a couple of years already. So the relationship works in two ways. We can also learn something from them because some of them have really large capacities already, and these sustainability teams that are responsible for assessing these data. We established platforms for sustainable finance, Ministry of Finance platforms for sustainable finance. One of the platform is a platform that where we meet with other stakeholders from the public administration. That means other departments, relevant departments for this topic. But the other one is the sustainability finance platform for the corporate sector. The message from both of them is about data. Data accessibility and data usage. So this is where we would like to focus our efforts, making sure that the data they need to report on these issues are accessible. There are many institutions, parts of public administration that are responsible for certain data collection that will be used in these reports, but these data are not interoperable. They are not put out in a format that would be user-friendly. They are not always accessible publicly. So this is something that we would like to focus on because, as Martin mentioned, there will be significant compliance cost in the beginning of the process. But what we expect, what happened with almost all the regulation, and in time and a medium to long term, it's going to get like semi-automated. So once you're fully familiar with the way how to report, it's not going to be such a deal. But this data is really crucial for us because if you look at the financial reporting side, you have a pretty standard reporting in terms of financial information. But now there's a new dimension of non-financial reporting, which is addressing the dimension of the resilience or the viability of different investment and projects. And this can be only assessed in terms of like additional data. And I think that when the market used to be really fragmented and decentralized in the ways how you assess these data, how you compile them together, how you report on them, then there are really significant information asymmetries and fragmentation of the market that's really time-consuming in terms of the investor assessing the viable options to put money into, and these projects cannot be compared because all of them, they are a little bit what we call black boxes. You can't really see the internals on how these ESG scores and how these green parameters have been reported or created. So there's a different perspective which you can take on the regulation coming from Brussels, and that is like harmonization of transparency or harmonization of the reporting. I think it's going to be really time-saving for the companies finally, because now they have clear mechanisms on how to report transparently. Another point, the SMEs, we'd like to focus on SMEs. That's our primary goal, because we feel that the big companies will have internal capacities to digest this agenda. But the SMEs, we've run a couple of interviews and polls, and really majority of them still don't know that this is on the table. So we have to kind of intensify the interactions with the SMEs associations and make sure that they understand what's coming, because the financial sector in Czech Republic, it's largely owned by foreign mothers, and these matters, they seem to have a clear guidelines on disinvestment from traditional sectors. So it's basically the world where you might arrive to a situation where you have a plan, but it's not going to be financed because you're not going to get a loan. And as Linda mentioned, I think these instruments, they give you opportunity on how to showcase that you want to do something different than, or in a different way compared to what has been done in the past.
Thank you, Otta. I know that we can now see it nowadays on arms/defense industry, right? And banks, private, but again, it's private sectors, right? Their own like decisions on what to finance and what not to finance. I mean, maybe Linda, over to you, because Otta mentioned usability aspects and mainstreaming public finance, right? And I know that you and ISFC are familiar with concept of DNSH, do no significant harm. It's a significant principle, right? Because if you cannot even pass that threshold, that means, like, in our environmental efforts and sustainability related efforts, that you are on the wrong path clearly. So maybe can you discuss on do no significant harm or other concepts that you have come across so far?
Do no significant harm, DNSH. DNSH is very interesting because I guess the main stumbling block initially was the scope for interpretation, and that's of course always an issue with any kind of legal things. If there's scope for interpretation, then there's scope for doing things differently, and then the comparability can break down. So the DNSH project is actually a technical assistance project under DG Reform, where we are working as a junior partner together with a consulting company called Trinomics. And actually my colleague Julian there in the first row, he runs the project on our part, so more detailed explanations about DNSH to Julian. But I believe that soon there will be the guidelines for the Czech Republic for all the public funding, how to actually consistently apply DNSH. And yeah, it's not easy. Even these guidelines for one country were really complicated, and we learned a lot. But again, it's not impossible. And I think that needs to be the main message, that all of this, yes, it will require your time, effort, and attention, but it's doable. And seeing it in practice, I think, is quite inspiring. And I think this is one of the things that maybe upsets me, is that people also don't use the opportunity to create best practice. You can actually be, I know people talk about thought leadership, etc., but actually, you always look at the best case studies, you learn from them. They actually influence then the market practices. So I think entities need to actually try and figure out how to implement it and how to create the best practice. Because then, guess what? Maybe eventually even your best practice might become the market standard. So I think that's an undervalued opportunity for almost anyone working in this space. The other interesting thing is that, of course, you don't have DNSH and sustainability experts on every corner. So since we're at a university, that can actually be anyone's superpower. You can definitely get better remuneration and greater job market if you are an expert in one of the sustainability topics. So I'm not going to expand too much on DNSH because it is a very technical thing. But again, just the fact that there is guidelines, and there's another technical assistance project, which I don't know when will it start. It's undergoing evaluation, but it's 9 countries looking at different sectors and actually trying to figure out DNSH guidelines. So again, we always wish for perfection, but I think Martin's message is very good, because essentially nobody expects everything to be perfect from the start. But we actually will learn through doing, and we will actually improve the situation through doing. And that would be also my main message, that we actually need people to just start doing. And yes, voice your concerns, but stop pushing back, because it's happening anyway.
Thank you, Linda. So maybe over to you, Martin, because I think this question, I mean, like, so basically, we will not delve into like technical stuff, don't worry.
Julian's there, he can
but do no significant harm. So basically, is there going to be a revision, or basically, is that what you are hearing all across the member states for, yeah, I mean, like, questions to revise it, not really, I mean, like maintaining the same level of ambition, but maybe achieving like the same target through other means, more simplified.
Thank you, Daniel. I think that we should also find a topic where we could disagree on the panel at some point to make it enjoyable for the for the audience. So push. But on the do not significant harm, maybe let's kind of recall the basics. The do not significant harm requirement is one of the 3 requirements in the taxonomy regulation, which essentially those who are not familiar with the concept, for any economic activity to be sustainable, this economic activity must substantially contribute to one of the 6 environmental objectives. Second, must do not significantly harm any of the 5, and then must meet some minimum social safeguards. So these 3 conditions have to be met. Now, this is for the private sector. This is for the private capital. This is in the taxonomy regulation, and we have specifically indicated the criteria for the do not significant harm that are very detailed. Here now I need to be also a little bit self-critical. What we hear, and not to paint everything, you know, rosy, we hear a lot from the stakeholders, from the companies in particular, that the do not significant harm criteria that we have designed are simply too tight, and they are really difficult to assess whether they ultimately companies comply with or not. And they argue, and we take it very seriously, the companies argue that we could have taken up the taxonomy in a much greater scale if the do not significant harm criteria were a little bit more user-friendly. So this is, I think, a valid criticism. I'm not saying, you know, that we got it wrong. I mean, I'm certainly not claiming that, you know, everything is perfect either. But this is an area that if we really want to bring the impact and really to make sure that companies and the financial sector take up taxonomy at scale, I think it's also responsibility of the Commission of the EU now to look at the criteria, whether we have calibrated everything right. And I already know, I can tell you, I mean, there are some examples where we may have got it really too tight. So that's also, by the way, why I'm here also in Prague. I have a series of basically meetings and seminars and events for 2 days to understand better from also the Czech stakeholders where we got it wrong and where we need to adjust. So it's not only about, you know, what the companies are doing, but also where we as policymakers can do job better. Now, last point on the do not significant harm that Linda was referring to, this is for the public sector, but let me reassure you, these kind of detailed criteria that we have in taxonomy are not used one by one for the public sector. That would have been crazy. This is nothing that you know, exists. I mean, for the public sector, the do not significant harm concept has been inspired by the taxonomy concept, but there is nobody, and especially the Commission, that would require the Czech Republic, and Otto can confirm that, you know, the Czech Republic in the RRF context, the Recovery and Resilience Facility context, the Czech Republic would have to meet all the specific technical screening criteria of taxonomy. And just to be clear that, you know, we talk about much tougher regime for the private sector and much looser regime for the public sector, but also for obvious reasons.
Thank you, Martin. Well, let's stay with taxonomy. One more question, maybe over to Linda. When you hear argument on taxonomy, because I mean, like, it's a never-ending story on economic activities and level of ambition and how you define them, and maybe because of the workload, not all activities that could have been included were not included in the first batch, right? So if we hear actually from Martin that it helps, it should enhance allocation of capital, and some activities are clearly not there, and the Commission postponed them for inclusion for a later stage. I mean, like, do you see that or do you think that it can indeed lead to, yeah, I mean, like, uninformed, or let's say misinformed decision by some investor because they want to actually invest into something that is included in taxonomy, and this activity is not there for pure reasons, not that it's not substantially contributing, but because there was not enough time and capacity to actually include them?
I have to say that I've never come across an investor who hasn't invested in a good opportunity whether it's included in taxonomy or not. So that just doesn't happen. People usually will look at the business, they will look at their risk appetite, and now the risk appetite will also include certain ESG factors, and that's all. So it's not actually yet completely reshaping where people park their money. It might in the future, but it isn't doing it right now. And I think that that's what is going to change systematically over the next decade, is that people will be much more aware of the double materiality, so not just the risk to the company, but also the risk of the company to the natural capital and the stability of the systems. And from my opinion, where I see the most progress made is insurance, because of course that makes complete sense. It hits their pocket if you have contagion of events. I remember working with Aviva 15 years ago, and they're one of the most advanced, and they were saying that, you know, if we have an event in Japan, US, Europe, and one more anywhere else in the same year, this is a complete disaster. And if they start becoming even more frequent, that's even worse. So we're starting losing money, we will have to drive up insurance premiums, etc., right? So that's one element. The other element is, of course, another sector that I think is a lot further advanced in some countries, is pension funds. Because for pension funds, you have constant payouts. You have to monitor how your investments are doing, whether you will be able to pay pensions. And again, I have a very positive story where one of the pension funds in Sweden actually worked on very, very strong engagement strategy with teeth. So with some reduction in investment to make sure that Volvo goes completely electric. And these are the positive stories, right, where actually you can change a lot, but the change happens often people are blindsided because they think that the situation that's now is going to continue. And I think that we need to be aware that all of the disclosures will give a lot more decision-making power going forward, right? So once you actually are going to start getting CSRD data, we will keep perfecting the data over the years. We will understand how it interlinks with other economic fundamentals. And that's when I think the major changes in the repricing of the assets, etc., will start happening. So that's the most, for us, exciting forecasting and modeling. And if you look at inevitable policy response, that was launched 2 weeks ago in New York. I had a lot of questions, and it was such a fun debate because guess what? If you actually map all the current legislation, recent legislation, forthcoming legislation, and then you aggregate it and start looking at how it's going to change and reprice certain things, well, then you start realizing that some sort of economic fundamental change is inevitable. That's why inevitable policy response. Of course, there might be backlash, there might be like, you know, small tweaks going forward depending on what government goes where, but even then to reverse it is almost impossible.
Thank you. Maybe Otta, what is your view? Because we touched upon both public and, I mean, like private and public finance, and that public sector tries to follow suit. So so how do you feel your role? I mean, like, is it like, I mean, like on behalf of public finance, do you think that basically you will see like what kind of investment gaps are we talking about, and if private finance are taking lead, or I mean, like it can be solved through private financing only, and you focus on, like, I don't know, like let's say infrastructure projects and something like that, or do you think that also like to start and act as a catalytic, let's say, first loss capital that is flooding into that? Do you see your role as that as well?
Another good question. I think it would be preliminary to say that, or it would not be correct to say that we have a clear vision yet. This is part of discussions we are having. For us, the most important thing is to assure that the pipeline of the ready-made projects for financial instruments, like, for example, the green bonds or instruments linked to taxonomy or the NHS principle, that we have a supply of sufficient body of projects. And why this is important? Because, I mean, you now have the financial instruments or the instruments of sustainable finance, but if you don't have the projects to finance, actually, then the instruments are just there in an empty space. And to prepare a project in a to be in a shape for these financial instruments, it takes a couple of years, and you need to take these issues into consideration right from the phase 0 when you're actually building the idea or the vision of the project. So if you're talking about these large infrastructure investment and projects that are financed or co-financed by the state administration, these projects take like 5 to 10 years to develop and design, and you need to think about these right from the onset of planning. So, I mean, there could be a political, willingness to go heavily in, say, in direction of green bonds, but then you have to generate the project that you will finance by the green bonds. So it's very important, like political discussion that needs to happen in terms of making sure that this is part of the thinking of the project teams, that we can really generate projects that are eligible for this type of financing. There are 3 or 4 broad areas where we are thinking that the sustainable finance would be applicable. This is the development of the railway network, especially the high-speed railways. Then it could be an area of affordable housing. But for example, if you talk about affordable housing, we need to make sure that we have a proper assessment on the difference of the upfront costs of building affordable housing in a taxonomy aligned shape and building it in a traditional way, because of course the additional costs will be there, but then we need to look at the whole life cycle of the investment and look at the possible energy savings and the costs that you don't need to pay because it has a certain standard, and you have been thinking about the resilience and the viability of the project in terms of like 30, 40 years ahead. So this is important. Last point, I think that has not been mentioned, is that this whole agenda hinges a little bit on the assumption of the greenium, of the premium that should materialize somewhere in the financial sector. That means that if you come with a project that's aligned with the taxonomy and that fulfills the sustainability criteria, you should be able to get not only access to finance, but maybe a lower rate or get it cheaper. And that's what we hope we will only see with the harmonization of sustainability-linked bonds and the EUGB standard, because so far the market has been really fragmented. There are several studies that you can see some kind of premia, but it's in terms of like individual basis points and the difference of the rate or the yield. And we'll see if this is going to materialize, because this will be a crucial and a key motive for companies or the public entities to go this way, to see that the financial sector really reflects the effort and the way that these investments are designed in a different way, are trying to achieve some different goals than just providing infrastructure.
Thank you, Ota. So if I may, when can we expect sovereign green bonds on behalf of Czechia?
That's a tough question, but I can say we're discussing this option because I think they have been just published, or they should be published this month in the official journal. So it's an official legislation that we can now use. I think we will definitely, if we do it, we will definitely start with some kind of piloting projects, which will be rather lower amounts of bonds issued by the public sector. Hopefully, we'll see that soon. That's what I can say, I guess, now.
All right.
I will help Otto, because at the end, Czech Republic and European Union, Czech Republic is still part of the European Union, so the Commission has issued green bonds on its own. So, you can also say that, we have done something at the public sector as well.
All right. No, thank you. So before we move to questions, and again, feel free to ask questions for our panelists. Maybe, Martin, when you mentioned that there are, like, when we discussed costs for reporting and that it actually pays off. So, what do you see some stories actually for like when we talk about like long run or long term horizon, that it actually pays off to invest either in green initiatives. I'm not really talking about voluntary, let's say, reporting, but trying to follow and trying to, because we discuss decarbonization of the economy through finances. So, so do you see such stories actually happening?
Yes, we do, but I think it would be a bit too early to make a definitive statement that, you know, there is such a robust greenium and all that. I mean, at this stage, we have not yet, you know, started a comprehensive reporting by the companies. I told you that 3 hours ago, the Parliament endorsed the European reporting standards according to which European large companies have to report. That will happen only later after this endorsement. What we have seen so far is reporting from the companies on taxonomy. And I have to say that we have been relatively encouraged by the first results. I'm still trying to investigate how it works in the Czech Republic, but just to give you some flavor, is that from the companies that are in the Stoxx 600 index, those that have reported a non-zero, something else than zero, that on average 17% of their revenues of these companies are aligned with taxonomy, and most importantly, approximately 23% of the capital expenditures of investments of those companies are aligned with taxonomy, which indicates a strong potential, especially of the capital expenditure and the forward-looking measure to improve the performance over time. Now, if you ask me how is it being rewarded by the financial sector, do we already have some, you know, convincing case? I have to say that I have already seen some, because we have now seen how, for instance, asset managers and investors are putting these companies that have credible plans, that have high numbers on the taxonomy-aligned capex, how they include those companies in ESG funds or ESG indices. So we do see this. Now, if you ask me, do I have a perfect correlation that would demonstrate also a better financial performance of those companies? We are seeing some anecdotal evidence, yes we do, but it would be too early and it would not be credible now for me to confirm that there is a very robust trend. It's just too early. We would like to see that, but it's too early.
So maybe one of the last questions, this one would be for you, Linda. So when Martin talked about, yeah, I mean, like financing, from financing perspective, from investors' perspective as well, on behalf of ESG, when investor actually want to shape her decision based on ESG performance of a company, research, because we are at the university now, research shows that actually you can't really chase too many goals at the same time. So, so do you actually see, like, where would you suggest, or what would be your advice for, I don't know, retail investor, like what to focus on? Because if I take together climate, biodiversity, I mean, like, even if we stay within E in ESG, it looks like very broad array of topics, objectives to me.
Well, that's also why there's a massive rise in thematic funds. I don't think you're the only one who's noticed that, because people genuinely, it's very complicated. So we are also now seeing something very new. There's even in Czech Republic now a fund that will be launched that will use an ESG-linked carry mechanism. So this is actually the general partner linking their own remuneration to ESG impact. They will measure it, they will verify it, they will aggregate it, and then when they close the fund, they will see whether they have a carry or not. You can structure it differently. We'll have a publication about it next month, because it's one of the most interesting new developments that different types of bodies are looking into, from EIF to EBRD. But I think that the interesting thing here is that there are certain things that, and we talk about materiality assessment a lot in this space, and I think that one thing that is material to absolutely every single business is, of course, GHG emissions. So, for example, that we know how to calculate, how to verify, etc., etc. It's the same with, for example, energy use. Most of that data we already have. It's your electricity and your energy bills. So there are certain things that we can definitely do and ask companies and funds to collect. And from a retail investor perspective as well, I mean, from what I see across the market, I think, at least with the emissions, we're starting to understand fully Scope 1, Scope 2, even Scope 3. We are already getting a lot better at it. So I think going forward, this is going to be the one metric that you will not be able to run away or hide from, because it is material across everything. The S, I'm not going to go into it. We wrote quite a lot about the S a couple of years ago. Again, that's very geography specific, but there are certain, again, S factors that actually they apply to almost every single business. So that is the gender pay gap, it's employee turnover, et cetera, et cetera. So there are certain metrics that you can apply to any generalist fund or almost any company. So I think that that's also a myth that, you know, we can't do everything. We don't need to do everything. Look at if you're at the start of your journey, look at the 5 metrics that matter most to you. And that's what people do, right? That's just what happens. I mean, taxonomy is more complicated, but also interesting fact about taxonomy. We've done a lot of workshops on taxonomy. And turns out, once people actually familiarize themselves with the taxonomy navigator, all of a sudden it's as if, like, you know, it's a shock. Oh, wow, actually it's not that complicated. So it's, again, getting familiar with completely new tools. And that takes a bit of time. And it will also take a bit of fine-tuning, right, going forward in terms of usability. But yeah, it's definitely doable.
Is there, maybe Martin, over to you. So basically, I completely agree. So on behalf of thematic funds and so maybe first question, because the Commission proposed a legislation towards ESG rating. So will we still see misalignment and different ESG ratings of some companies? Maybe a easy question for you.
We will. The purpose and the aim of this legislative, the very last legislative proposal from the Commission under this mandate that the Commission adopted in June, and this is currently being negotiated by Member States in the Parliament, was not to harmonize the rating methodology. It was not to tell the ESG rating providers, this is what you have to do. The purpose of this piece of legislation was to bring minimum degree of transparency about how the ESG rating providers are actually doing this. Because, by the way, not only the financial sector complained about it, but many companies. I mean, I have heard also chess. By the way, you mentioned, Linda, yourself. I have heard so many companies complaining about ESG rating providers. And the purpose, again, is to bring minimum degree of transparency about the way, the methodology that the rating agencies have used, and the way how they have reached certain conclusions, because many companies argue it's a black box. And at the end, they differ, and they will continue to differ. That's perfectly fine. But what we need is again more clarification and explanation of what has happened.
There is actually a working party meeting as we're speaking now online that's discussing the ESG ratings proposal, where the Ministry of Finance negotiates the position of the Czech Republic with other stakeholders in Brussels. It's happening today. So the proposal, just to add, the proposal is not closed. There are many dimensions, many aspects that remains to be discussed, and you know, we need to find agreement on many of them. And as Martin said, they have introduced the draft proposal in June, which we keep discussing.
Okay. Thank you all. Let's start with Q&A. We have some interesting questions, provoking questions from our audience. So the first one is for you, Martin. So you mentioned new regulations come in as a result of the Green Deal, but are we sure that this EU's ambitions won't harm EU and Czech competitiveness?
Look, I already mentioned the very basic premise that sustainability and mainstreaming sustainability considerations in the way how businesses and the financial sector operate will ultimately improve the competitiveness over the medium to long term. Now, of course, you can argue, you can take the other perspective is that, you know, over the short term, European companies that have to disclose certain things. I mean, if we stay in the area of sustainable finance, they have to disclose more than the US companies. And then, you know, we had a big debate when we calibrated the European reporting standards, whether we are actually forcing European companies to disclose their secrets, their confidential information about the way how they run business. Well, at some point there was this risk, but we have calibrated the proposal in a way that would not make these companies uncomfortable. And if there is a kind of, company secret and, competitive kind of edge that the company should not disclose, this would not be disclosed. So we have tried really to be very pragmatic. Those of you who are familiar with the content of the reporting standards ultimately imposed on the companies now and today, cleared by the parliament, you have noticed that we have really been very reasonable and we have cut a lot of things and we have improved, the set of indicators. We have reduced the set of indicators. We have introduced many phase-in, possibility to report only on things that are material, so not on everything. So there has been also a criticism from the financial sector that we are now requesting less from the companies. But I would say that if you look at the reporting by the companies as it currently stands in our reporting standards, I don't believe that it would put European companies into a competitive disadvantage vis-à-vis the US. Another debate that we are having currently in Brussels, I need to be very honest again, is on the proposal on the due diligence. There is another legislative proposal from the Commission which essentially mandates the companies to exercise due diligence when they make their business and also to assess the sustainability risks throughout their value chain. And a lot of debate and the question I think is targeting this proposal is whether the proposal is calibrated in the right way that would not put European companies at competitive disadvantage vis-à-vis the US in particular. But this is a live proposal that is now being negotiated and I prefer not to comment on it publicly.
All right, thank you for a comprehensive answer. Again, one more question for you, Martin. How did you navigate the lobbying efforts by majors such as BlackRock or Vanguard in drafting of the EU Sustainable Finance Framework legislation?
I would say we have navigated pretty well because I think that we have made everybody equally unhappy. I will not say equally, but certainly everybody unhappy.
Is that the way how to
I think even my bosses are unhappy with me these days, but this is a public event. No, I have to say that, in the beginning we have been accused of being captured by the NGOs. You have seen the debate on gas and nuclear, where we have ultimately decided to recognize some transitional activities in taxonomy precisely to reflect the realities on the market. So there we have faced significant, backlash from the NGOs. And I don't want to recall the debate, but this just shows to you that that we were not, handled by the NGOs very positively. At the same time, the industry is not particularly happy with the agenda now either, because they argue that now they have to do what they ask for is cumbersome. Now we try to understand what it is that they are doing, so we are of course asking them the question, how are you using this toolkit that you wanted us to develop 5 years ago? So the conversation we are now having is also making some participants a bit uncomfortable, because now through the disclosures it will become much more apparent who is doing what. Because we should not forget the disclosure requirements also apply to the financial sector. And this is already live. So we do see how financial sector participants already report, and obviously supervisors are asking the right questions. Linda mentioned the greenwashing. So now there are some questions that are being asked by the supervisors, by the Czech National Bank, by the ECB, and some investors are particularly not happy about it. So I think that overall, I think that we have, I can say that we have not been criticized now by being captured by a particular stakeholder. The way how we have been working was relying on a group of people. We had these expert groups that we try to balance accordingly. Now, if we have got it always perfectly right, I cannot say, but I think overall people are largely unhappy equally.
Thank you for an honest answer. So, Otta, over to you. Who do you see as the biggest opponent of the green transition? Is it the political representation, some sectors, or businesses?
Easy.
There are challenges with all of these stakeholders. I would say, I guess that you have to state the case clearly to get a buy-in from all these stakeholders. We've discussed these competitiveness concerns, productivity concerns. I can say that, I mean, generally, every additional layer of regulation adds costs and makes you kind of less competitive, at least in the short term. But as it happens with many of the European regulation, it also moves you a little bit up in this value-added ladder. That means that you can just then produce and sell stuff that's very different from products or services that you have made before. The case for the regulation needs to be stated clearly, and I think that's we're always encouraging Commission to complement these proposals with robust regulatory impact assessment studies, where we can see the preliminary expected impacts or effects on relevant stakeholders, which we then can use and put it into a domestic context and see how these concerns materials in terms of the Czech economy. If we are able to build this case, then it always helps to have evidence-based approach and show data and successful case studies to any of these stakeholders that you want to be a part of the process. And as you say, there has to be a buy-in from political representation. There has to be a buy-in from a private sector. There has to be a buy-in from NGOs. Otherwise, it's always good to do this effort in all of these three fields and make sure that all the relevant stakeholders are at the table at the very phase of the process. So I would say that the challenges equal with all of them, and I don't want to end up saying that the resulting case is making all of them equally unhappy. But of course, some of them are much more happy with the general gist of the regulation. But I think you can really work with all of them when your case is really well done, prepared, and evidence-based, and you can show some data and some successful case studies. That always worked. If this doesn't work, then I have no idea what would.
No, thank you. I think it's optimistic to hear that actually you already gathered the views of the various stakeholders, because you mentioned that you have two national platforms on sustainable finance, one for public and one for private sector, right? So I think it's a good start. All right, so let's move to Linda. How should SMEs drive ESG activities with limited or no ESG expertise and little resources for consulting services? Is it a luxury for the rich?
It's a very good question. This is just my observation. So I'm Latvian, full disclosure. So it's very interesting to actually, when you travel across even the CE region, to see how different countries, the SMEs in different countries approach it. So Latvian SMEs, quite a big faction of them, have decided that, oh, we need to get good at this. So actually, through the employers' union, they've started trying to find people who can come in, tell them how they did it, and actually proactively educate themselves. I mean, we all have internet, Google it. I think that that's the biggest issue here, is that there's no proactive approach by majority of companies. That the only solution that gets considered is, let's get consultants in. And of course, consulting, I mean, you can also, there's a wide range of spectrum in terms of pricing here, right? Yes, it will be a cost, but to be honest, you can even start yourself at almost zero cost. It's your staff time that you will have to pay for, yes, but you pay for a lot of staff time on a variety of things. And I think that the major issue here is that I think that the movement will start and the stakeholders will start moving once you actually do start seeing the greenium or speedier approval of loans or some sort of a tangible change. Currently, I guess it's difficult, and currently, absolutely, it is the privilege of the richest companies that have the resources, that can invest in the expensive Big Four consulting or other types of consulting. But I do think that even the smallest actors can actually start navigating the space relatively successfully, because when we looked at this Czech SME, all they had to report on was 30 indicators, very simple indicators. The ESG carry mechanism, it's a tiny fund. It only has, I think, 7 employees. And the point is that they actually believe that there needs to be a transition. So it's not a green fund from the start. They actually have created the carry mechanism to bring the investment companies on a journey of GHG reduction. So I think that there's a variety of things how you can approach it, and it's not always super expensive.
Right, thank you. So, question for Martin. If the EU is done with legislation, what about activities such as mining that are not included in the taxonomy yet? How do you do no significant harm then?
Well, we have finished the regulatory wave under this mandate of the Commission, and for the time being we are not planning to adopt new taxonomy under this mandate, which is finishing towards the end of next year. Now, what we are doing, and I do confirm, we are working together with some distinguished experts in the Platform on Sustainable Finance on developing the criteria. We are using this expert group to develop these criteria first, that then the Commission processes. And I can confirm that the mining criteria are now really on top of the list. This is one of the key priorities we have recognized in the critical raw material communication adopted by the Commission earlier this year, that our dependence on these critical raw materials, you know, from elsewhere and from other countries is really very high. So we need to develop approaches that would help finance these projects in a more sustainable and also robust and I would say also kind of reliable way over time. So the platform is working on it. We do expect the platform to finalize the criteria on mining before the end of next year, so that the next Commission under the next mandate can adopt the new delegated act on these criteria as soon as possible.
Czech Republic is just to disagree a little bit.
Good.
Czech Republic is a part of a group of countries that are putting a pressure on the European Commission to actually adopt or amend the delegated act and make the mining of critical materials part of it, and make sure that we have some kind of sustainability criteria in terms of how this is supposed to be done, to make sure that you have access to finance. Why we think it's important? Because it's critical materials that, like nickel, cobalt, that will be absolutely essential for the green transition, for example, the e-mobility part, for like battery assembly. So we would like to make sure that these criteria are part of the taxonomy as soon as possible, so we have transparent parameters on how these economic activities are supposed to be done in terms of being sure that we are aligned with the trajectory to carbon neutrality in EU.
Thank you. One more question for towards taxonomy. So do you know when the taxonomy for agriculture will be available? So any of you? It's not really addressed to
I guess it's rather, again, for me, apologies for talking again, but agricultural is, I think, the only big sector that we have not covered with taxonomy, especially climate taxonomy. And by the way, even the biodiversity objective is not really a big one, because we have 2 activities for biodiversity currently. The reason why we have not done that was that during the time when we were developing the criteria, there were parallel negotiations of the common agricultural policy, and it was simply not feasible, also for political reasons, to adopt criteria that would be first credible, second that would be usable, and ultimately that would be politically acceptable. And we have reached the conclusion that unless we can really be sure that these 3 conditions can be met, it's better not to do that under this mandate. Now, the previous platform on sustainable finance has developed criteria for not only climate objectives, but also for biodiversity and for other objectives. And now it's obviously for the next Commission to decide whether agriculture will be included in the future delegated acts or not. I cannot comment on that, but I do confirm that the work has been done at the experts level. I cannot commit to the next Commission what they would like to do next.
Okay, thank you. One more question on reporting. So isn't it unfair to force businesses to view new regulations as opportunities when they are in fact just mitigations to new regulatory risks? On behalf of, and it's not really addressed to whomever is willing to actually answer this question, but maybe I just compliment, because from what we've heard so far in the panel is that you want to actually show the stories on cost-benefit analysis and success stories, how it actually works, and how actually that upfront cost, regulatory cost, is then amortized over some period of time. So I don't know if any of you want to answer this question.
I just want to make a quick remark. I think what I've also heard a lot when I travel around our region here is that there's often a concern that competitiveness, but what about China? What about other geographies? And I think that what we often forget is that China is a completely different political system. Once they will decide to do something, and years ago, under the UNEP FI, we actually worked on the Chinese central banking, greening of the central banking system. And they actually did so much work on it, so they already have the plans in a drawer. They can open the drawer and implement. We sitting in the EU don't have that luxury. We actually need the time to get everybody's buy-in. We just spoke about stakeholders. We need the political buy-in. So actually, that's why we don't have the luxury of that kind of a system and the time. So we need to start it now to actually be able to implement and figure out the right acceptable way forward. So I think that's also something not to forget, that, you know, if there's going to be a decision that this is the best economic model, some other geographies can implement it much faster than we can as a block of multiple countries. So they move faster.
Right. So we will close soon. Last question for Ota. Analogically to the private sector, is there a space for setting ESG realms into basic run of public sector as well? So if I understand it, the question that we touched upon, and that is the same level of mainstreaming both through public and private sector. So how do you see it, this question?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So I will rephrase, because as far as I understand the question, it is about, is there a space for setting ESG realms into basic run of public sector as well? So maybe a general question that I don't really think is heading towards the direction of ESG reporting on behalf of public sector, but rather like aligning to those principles that private sector is delivering on.
Yeah, there's definitely an effort to take these considerations really seriously into like economic policy planning. I can mention here that we recently started quite a big project, TSI project, technical support instrument project with the European Commission on the development of national framework for sustainable finance. I think through the deliverables of these projects, some of them should be the best practice report, where we get the overview of the best practices of other countries in EU which are relevant to the case of the Czech Republic. Another deliverable would be the diagnostic report, which should identify the legislation gaps and the policy gaps we need to fill with additional measures. And there's going to be also a group of, or a set of recommendations, context-specific recommendations for the Czech Republic, and also complemented by a roadmap. That means the ordering of the steps, which is really important in terms of implementing the relevant measures. So we really expect to get lots of valuable outputs from these projects that could then be transferred in it's a preliminary statement, but we'd like to form something like a Czech national strategy on sustainable finance. So for the agenda, that would be more like a policy-making tool that would give these general directions where Czech Republic should aim and what's the options, and it could be a menu for political representation to choose whether this is the option or whether some options are more likely to be aligned with their views.
All right, thank you, Ota. So maybe a round of closing remarks. I may start with Martin, but please be brief.
I will be very brief.
Let's close the meetings.
I would very much hope that everybody would approach this agenda with an open mind and go beyond the mere compliance with the regulatory framework that, again, I don't underplay how difficult it can be, but we do need to talk about how we can scale up the impact and how to ensure that the agenda works on the ground. And this is now in the hands of the companies, of the proactivity of the companies, and the proactivity of the financial sector. So the Commission is here, obviously, to fix any bugs that we have in the system. That's also why I'm here, and to discuss over the next 2 days. Those of you who are interested, please do engage, because making sure it works on the ground and scale up the impact it should be the main objective of this agenda now.
Thank you.
I don't think I have much to add, but I think anyone who reads the news and follows the discussions, etc., understands that climate change is with us. It's here to stay. It affects all systems, all stakeholders, everyone. The second trend, of course, and this is not what the conference is for, is technology. But you marry the two and you have opportunities and you have risks. And it is actually very important to figure out how we navigate it. And these are useful tools for navigating the change. Because people often argue that, I just don't know how to approach this. Well, use the tools that you have available and figure out where your competition is at. And figure out how you can actually maybe promote yourself through bigger proactivity. Because the opportunity is definitely there, but also the risk. So don't underestimate the risk to your potential business and profit.
So it's a very ambitious set of legislation or proposals. It will take a certain time for the public administration to digest it, and so it sets down administratively. For us, the key is the data. Lots of the data stays still with the public administration. We'd like to make sure there's access to the data, and in this way we would facilitate the companies to report on this data and contribute to some kind of like business environment certainty in terms of creating environment that is stable, because this is what's really important for the corporate sector.
Thank you so much. So thank you all for your remarks, fruitful discussion. Thank you all in the audience for your questions. Huge round of applause for our panelists. And let's break now for around 20 minutes, and then we will continue with our second panel. Thank you so much.
Great.
may I ask you to take your seats? We'll shortly proceed with the second panel. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue with today's conference with the second panel. Bridging the first panel, the Sustainability in Finance, Bridging Transformation to Real Life, or bringing the EU taxonomy and green transition to the ground. We will proceed, and I think some of the points has been already touched upon in the first panel. We will proceed with the panel Decarbonisation, Public Finance and Private Financing, What Scenarios for Czechia? I'm very happy to, or I'm very privileged to chair this panel. My name is Jerolim Antal. I'm the head of the Center for European Studies here at the Faculty of International Relations of this university. And let me introduce the panelists that I have here with me. We have an excellent lineup, also international and also from sector. So I'm very happy to chair this part of the conference. So first of all, allow me to introduce Hélène Lanier, who joined us from Paris, and she is the managing director of 2 Degrees initiative. Helen has been working as around 15 years in financial industry and regulation, and she leads sustainable finance project in Europe and abroad on topics related to greening of the financial sector, transition plans and sustainability disclosure. She's a member of the European Platform for Sustainable Finance. Those of you who've been following us in the first panel know that this is an expert platform that advises or discusses with the Commission the overall proposals, their eventual impacts, and so on. And Helen, as I mentioned, leads the 2 Degrees initiative, so platform or think tank that is managing, coordinating projects focused on green transition and greening of the financial sector. Helen, thank you very much that you found time. I know that you are very busy and you have busy schedule this week, but we are very happy to have you. We also have Richard Juřík, who is the Deputy Director of Department of Environmental Policy and Sustainable Development at the Ministry of Environment. Richard, also thank you very much for joining us. We discussed some of the very hot points that probably will be a subject of the of this panel, so we will come to that shortly. And also, it's my great privilege also to have here Raul Garcia Rodriguez, who is Deloitte's Sustainability and ESG Advisor team leader. So also thank you very much for joining us. It's been not far from the building, right next door, right around the corner. And allow me now very briefly to sort of a kick off with some thoughts that we could bridge with the previous panel. So we discussed the challenges that the job that a Commission has done, and now we will be waiting what will be next happening with the implementation in the member states. We also talked about the issues that touch upon the data, some of the sectoral challenges, also the issues of the compliance. But our aim of this panel is to look at not only Czechia, the challenges that this country is facing. It's been also pointed out in the first panel that the country is pretty much relying on industry, and this is, I would say, the structure of the economy is important for the transition. So it sets a number of challenges. We will discuss that, and also in the connection to the document that has been just very shortly or briefly approved at the government. That's the National Environmental and Climate Plan, an important document that sort of outlines the challenges that how the country will tackle the challenges when it comes to delivering the climate goals. So we'll start with that. A second dimension that I would like to cover is the experience or the challenges that we can see from the perspective of individual investors, right? So we mainly discuss in the first panel the questions for businesses, the SMEs, and the government, the regulator, the whole regulatory environment. But what it comes to individual investors, what challenges we can see, and how, what would be the guarantees for investors that are investing in a way that it complies with the ESG, and what we can learn from other countries, because I don't want to stick only with the case of this country, but also I think it's very important to look at the practices and the lessons that can learn from other countries. So that would be the perspective that Helen hopefully will try to cover. And the job for Raul in this regard, Raul, you've been working in the particularly in real estate, right? And I think it nicely fits to what I was talking about, to the plan, to the national environmental and the climate plan of the country, regarding the energy efficiency of the buildings, right? Investors, demand of the investors for buildings that comply with the rules of with the ESG. What is the attitude of the market, but both also the investors, developers, construction companies, but also the tenants, for example, right? So I think it's also interesting to look at that. So having said that, let me open the panel. So after the panelists give their statements around, let's say 8 or 10 minutes. We will also turn to the audience with the questions that will follow. Also, let me remind you that you can post the questions on Slido, use the hashtag FIR 2023. I will be also happy to look at what we have on the platform, and also feel free here in the room to join us for additional remarks, comments, or questions. So without further ado, I will start with the context of the Czech economy and the challenges that the country will tackle. And I'm actually happy to have it here from the right person who's been behind of the whole document. Ricard, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure. As been said, I've been working on the National Energy and Climate Plan. My role was, I was the coordinator of the evidence-based analysis, which has guided the political discussion, which is great because I think we have done a good work. And we have a very robust analytical background behind the National Energy and Climate Plan. And it's also my pleasure to be able to say here publicly that the National Energy and Climate Plan was approved by the Czech government today. But it's not final, because we send it to the Commission, and the Commission will assess it and review it, and have a look how the EU climate objectives are reached on the overall European level. And afterwards, we suppose that we will have to deal with these comments and assessment at the beginning of next year. But what I can say is that we had set quite ambitious goals for the Czech Republic. As you probably are familiar, the Czech Republic is a carbon-intensive economy. Almost a third of the GDP is based on industry. We are an industrial country in the European context, and but the objective is to reach 63% of the overall greenhouse gases reduction until 2030, which is over the 55% on the European level. But I think it's fair, because our contribution to this reduction should be higher than, let's say, the overall European average. So what are the challenges? And there are many, of course. I will give you some big numbers. I don't know if I tell you something or not. Most of them are, let's say, quite high, but still we think that it is manageable to deal with the decarbonization in the Czech Republic. And also, I also think, by the discussions with the stakeholders, that the level playing field has changed and that the industry acknowledges that the change has to come and that we have to modernize the economy. So what are the challenges? Let's say overall investment costs are somewhat above 5,000 billion crowns, but it's a huge number. It's probably much bigger because it doesn't include some infrastructure projects that has to be there. Nevertheless, if you look at the total capital investments within the economy, it's not that much. It's doable. And also some of the investments would have been conducted also in the business as usual scenario. It's just about, let's say, fastening the transition of a Czech economy and investing more into the modernization. What is the role of the investments is crucial for fulfilling the climate objectives. We have the estimate of the overall public finances is 1,200 crowns. These are the total funds that we receive from the ETS, or we will receive until 2030 from the ETS, from the cohesion funds, from the National Recovery Plan, etc. But here you see the values. We have over 5,000 capital costs and we have 1,000 of subsidies. So it's natural that we need also the private sector to contribute to the modernization and to the financing. It's not feasible to think that we will finance as a state everything, and we have to focus on groundbreaking investments and in the overall economy. So I will try to run through some of the key points in sort of the investments needs that we have and the challenges that we will have to face. So, first of all, project preparation. There is a lot of discussion about the permitting processes. We, as a state administration, have to, or as a government, we have to, let's say, reform that. And we have to be able to permit the investment projects much quicker than we are today. But at the same time, what is also important is the ambition on the side of the private sector. The private sector prepares the investments and the investment projects. So we are still in the market economy, so we can, as a government, we can subsidize some technologies. But I think our role is also in setting up the objectives, and these are now set by the National Energy and Climate Plan. But we need the active contribution from the stakeholders, and there is no use to invest in old technologies, in fossil fuel technologies, etc. This is something that I have to say clearly. The next challenge is the renovation wave. We have to, as a Czech Republic, we have to be much better in, we have to do better in energy efficiency in the residential sector. And since 2027, there will be an extension of the EU ETS system on heating fuels and the transport fuels. And the best fuel is that we do not need. Therefore, we have to renovate our residential stock, and the overall investment cost until 2030 of the renovation wave is estimated around 600 billion crowns. What is pretty much demanding for the renovation wave is that it also boosts the employment in the construction sector, and the estimation of extra employment needs in this sector is above 100,000 of new employees, which should be there on the market around 2030s in order to be able to renovate our building stock as quick as we would have to, or we would like to see, let's say. The next point is the energy grid stability. We have set a quite ambitious goal, at least on the level of the Czech Republic, concerning renewables. The objective of the National Climate Energy Plan is to install 5 times more capacity of solar than we have today, because we also have to phase out coal, but the phasing out coal will eventually happen nevertheless of what we do because of the EU ETS system and the high price of the emissions. And we need to build new energy sources in the Czech Republic. So solar and contribution of wind is crucial. And with that comes the need to invest into accumulation and the energy grid stability in the Czech Republic. The next challenge will be definitely in the heating sector. We have half of the households are connected to the central heating facilities. Some of them have already switched to gas, but many of them still rely on coal. And the transformation should be on the way, and it's not set up, I think, in the National Climate Energy Plan in concrete, but this is something that, as our homework, stays with us. We also have to prepare for the new technologies. As an industrial country, we will need hydrogen, especially since let's say, middle of 2030s, but it also demands investments into the infrastructure, especially switching natural gas to hydrogen, so that we are able to import it. And the other quite new technology is the carbon capture and storage, because it is obvious that in the long run, we won't be able to reach climate neutrality, both or on the European level or the national Czech level, without incorporating carbon capture and storage. And this is something that needs to be done on the European level, but of course, it's also an opportunity for the innovation and for the technological improvements within the Czech economy. So I think I've run through the main challenges, at least what I see there. I don't want to be pessimistic. I think I'm quite very much optimistic that we are now ambitious in our objectives as a government. What that means for the private sector is, I would say, let's change the thinking. Let's think about the decarbonization as a modernization of the industry, of our overall economy. We can think of it also as an investment boost. The unprecedented amount of public money, both from the EU or from the ETS, will be dedicated to the transformative investments, and these may boost the GDP, especially during the 2030s. But we have to start now, because the process will take long. And now I come back to the beginning. The role of a financing is crucial, because I have stressed out the investment needs in my overview of the National Energy and Climate Plan. And I think that the sustainable finance, the taxonomy, the ESG reporting, these are a part of the overall puzzle of the instruments that we have to make the decarbonization work. and we also should apply them in the public funding in the sense of the do no significant harm principle, climate proofing of the investments, etc. And my last point, I'm from the Ministry of the Environment, so I would like to say that we have to think also about the other environmental objectives, not only the decarbonisation. And for instance, when we prepare the investments, we also have to think about the long-term resilience of these investments to climate change impacts, and also to think about the adaptation measures. It may seem demanding, it is. However, it's also very pragmatic because, I think the financial sector starts also to acknowledge that the climate risks are may mature into financial risks, and we are talking about the financial stability of the overall financial system, etc.
Ricard, thank you very much for this, I would say, very interesting cover of the main challenges that are resulting from the National Energy and the Climate Plan. Maybe just a follow-up question: where do you see, you as working at the Ministry of Environment, probably biggest progress if we look at looking at the investment needs? What you learned when looking and assessing the needs, where the country has made really progress, where we see that there's something's been happening, and the other extreme, where we think what is probably the most challenging. You mentioned the challenges, but perhaps you could, somehow assess what you think that really a lot of energy needs to be invested, and a lot of capacity needs to be invested to tackle that issue.
Okay, I think where we've seen quite a progress is that the market. Since the gas crisis or the high prices of natural gas because of the war of Russia in Ukraine has pushed the market to realize that we should invest into renewables. And there are many projects concerning the solar energy prepared in the Czech Republic. But where we lack, and which is connected to that, is that the infrastructure is unfortunately not ready for such a quick penetration of intermittent sources into the energy grid. So I think this is the challenge to prepare our infrastructure for the, let's say, new energy market or new energy sources.
Thank you. Perhaps we can go back to that later on and discuss it in more into detail. But now allow me to turn our attention to Helen. Helen, talking about the challenges of this country, you with the experience of coordinating, working with the projects internationally, what we can see, what is the way how such a challenges that Ricard mentioned could be tackled through activating private investment, to supporting or preparing a regulatory framework where also individual investors can step in. So what do you see, how the conditions shall be built in order to really activate the public or the private financing and also the individual investors and bridge their interest with the needs that the country indicated?
First of all, good evening and thank you for inviting me. This is a pleasure to be here and pleasure also to talk outside the usual circle of West European panels. So very happy to be here. I think, Ricard, you mentioned very concrete investments. I mean, infrastructure, thermic renovation, renewable energies. This speaks to everybody. And this speaks also to individual investors. And we have talked several times about the urgent need to mainstream finance for climate change, for biodiversity. And individual investors can be part of that. But more than that, and I want to really stress this very clearly, individual investors, retail investors want to be part of it. And this is where I think the informational gap lies. People think individual investors are not ready to, but this is not what our surveys show. We have been surveying 12 European countries in 2021-2022. And we have asked very basic questions to retail investors. We have told them, okay, tell me, with your money, what do you want to do? Do you want to have a financial return? Fair enough. Do you want to not harm the environment? Or do you want this to help solve the climate change issue? And what people told us is that 85% of them want to have some sort of impact, or at least something else than pure financial return. So this means that individual investors do want to help renewable energy, to help renovating thermic housing, etc., etc. And then we went a little bit further. And we told them, okay, would you prefer to align it with your values? Would you prefer to disinvest some harmful activities? Or do you want to have impact? And we explained them having impact, you know, this is a little bit more complex. This is your money changes something on the ground. Your money would reduce GHG emission on the ground. And more than 50% of them told us, yes, I would like my money to have impact, real world impact. And then we wondered, but how come? How come more than 50% of the people we asked want to have impact, but we see quite a few actually investing in not harmful or green financial products. So we wondered maybe there is a supply problem. So we went through a database, large database, of all the financial products offered in these 12 European countries. And we happened to learn that only 0.2% of the financial products offered in these 12 countries could actually qualify as what we call impact financial products. So this attitude behavior gap is rather a demand-supply inadequation. And then we were wondering, okay, so maybe there is a problem, the supply is not really there, but maybe also the distribution is not there. And then, so now we are in the process of conducting large surveys also with mystery shopping visits. Well, we train people to go and see financial advisors, asking that question, asking them, what should I do to get impact with my money? What should I invest, etc. And what we see is actually very, very low compliance with SFDR, MiFID II regulations at the moment. This is not a big surprise. I mean, these regulations are fairly new. So, of course, progress will be made in the next years, in the next months. It is also, it is already progressing. But since it is true that less than 50% of advisors are able to explain what is a green financial product, what's an impact financial product, even though they are questioned about it. And less than 20% of them would spontaneously mention this, although this is now mandatory. So I think that if you ask Mr. Smith on the street, they would like to have impact. They are ready to invest, and they are a large amount of money to be mobilized. I mean, we speak about pension funds, we speak about life insurance product, we speak about banking retail products. This is a massive amount of money. People are ready to engage, are ready to invest. So now we need to connect the dots. And connecting the dot will probably mean a lot of education, because of course retail investors need to be also educated, but a lot of training. Financial advisors need to be trained, need to be able to engage with their clients, to answer correctly their questions, because I think in good faith, financial advisors cannot do that at the moment. They don't have the keys to do that. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the time, and they are not incentivized to do that. So we have a lot to do, and but we see very progressive and promising, avenues to develop this, because retail investors are ready to.
Thank you, Helen, for introducing the result of the survey that you conducted. It's actually very inspiring to see the gap, right, that you found between the individual investors, their expectations, and then the facilitators, the advisors, right? That there is certain know-how and knowledge about that missing. But how about the regulatory framework? Do you think that for this the regulatory framework is actually ready for the banking sector to really take advantage? Because certainly what you are saying, I'm pretty sure the banking sector must be aware of that there is growing interest and growing need of the investors, individual investors, to focus on that. How would you comment that?
I wouldn't ask them whether they are ready or not. I mean, regulation is there, they have to comply with that. Investors are wanting to do this, and maybe the third and the most important point is that if they do not do that, they will be sued eventually. People don't want their products to harm the environment. If you explain them very clearly that their bank is financing a coal company, is harming the dolphins somewhere in the world, they are outraged. And I mean, they should be. So I think greenwashing, impact washing is no more acceptable by retail investors. And financial advisors, financial institutions need to do something, need to go there. Regulation is in place. It is complicated, of course, to apply it, but it is always complicated. I mean, if we compare it with the consumer protection regulation that was implemented years ago, this was exactly the same thing. It was a very complex regulatory framework, but now we see progress. So we are really hoping that same progress will be made in relation to sustainability preferences.
Thank you for that. We will perhaps come to that after we finish the round. Raul, you are working at the as a consultancy. You are working in the real estate sector. We already mentioned some of the challenges. Ricard mentioned that in the upcoming or the just approved national energy and climate plan. The buzzwords such as energy efficiency, construction permit, right? This is probably what you've been dealing with the clients, and then what you observe is it's actually one of the main crucial issues in the country. But more than that, how is the attitude of the real estate market when it comes to meeting the ESG goals and the whole the demand and supply, the expectations of the investors, developers, and then on the other side the consumers, and then the tenants.
Okay, understood. Well, thanks also again to you and to Daniel for bringing us here. It's very interesting to have this at the university. I think universities will play a very big role in finding all these people that we need to make a change, and if we want to, because without people around this, it's impossible that we do anything. And we have to be realistic to that. I'm missing students here, Daniel, so we have to talk about that. But it's good that we are here. So, supply and demand. I think, as Hélène was saying, nobody wants to harm if we can prevent from harming. I don't think that there is any developer that wants to cut one more tree than needed, or any person in any household that wants to spend one more liter of water than needed either. In fact, I think for real estate, the most obvious thing, and perhaps all of you who have either done your houses or you have, all of us use real estate. We are either users because we rent a place or we are in a university, it's a building, and we already know that we don't have to spend more than what we want. And what I was going is into efficiency. Efficiency is in the blood of real estate. And efficiency is the same as sustainability when it comes to the use of resources. So this is clear. And if we think about that in a logical way, it also leads to finance and it leads to everything else that we can think about sustainability. Nobody wants to spend more than what is needed. And that's there. Now, there is a question between what I must do, because the legal regulatory framework is obliging me to do, what I should do, because either I want to save or I want my clients to save, and then those savings I will transform into either rents or the price of the real estate, and what I want to do, which is to become the most sustainable developer or the most sustainable tenant, but somebody has to help me in doing this because not all the technology is at a scale where we can use it. The technologies are there, and I'm now bringing it to one of the questions that is there. Yes, there is a possibility to have net zero everything already. We've seen it, and some people have invested, and they have enough money to invest, and they produce net zero units of everything, not only of real estate. The question is, to what extent is this scalable? Can I buy this for my client? Can my client do this at a cost? And then is anybody going to pay for that? If I produce something that is net zero, it costs me more, X% more than what it would be normal expenditure, can I transfer this to the market? In some places you can, but then we have to link this to the sociology and the ethics of the people. Will you go to this apartment that is a little bit more expensive, but you know that you're spending less, or to this other one that is cheaper, it's a little bit older? I mean, I'm going to spend more, so it's going to be up to me what I do or what I don't do. Well, another question is, how much do we have to retrofit to make sure that there is not such a question, that everything is up to date? And this is, I'm also working with the UN and the Real Estate Market Advisory Group, and this is the big thing. We're talking about sustainable housing, we're talking about social housing, and we're talking about affordable housing. And when we talk about sustainable housing, which relates to the other two, is that, okay, we can bring people who may not have the means to be in a different place, we help them, but then they have to spend so much because the units are obsolete, and they spend so much on water and electricity and costs that they cannot really be there. And then you come with the taxes, and you put them in a nice place, but the municipal taxes are so high that the people cannot really stay there. So they move somewhere else, and then they have to pay a fine because you were giving them some help to be in that place. So all these things has to somehow make sense. And I think if we look at it in a logical way, the answer is there. The problem is to make this scalable.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking that you mentioned also this personal decision about what the tenant or the consumer, the individual would go for, and what actually brings me to the recent context or the economic crisis that we've been facing as a result of the Russian invasion to Ukraine, and then the inflation and so on. How is this affecting the real estate market in terms of what you've been talking about, right? Because if we put it in the Czech context, it is, I mean, the inflation has been very high and it remains. Is this also sort of affecting the decision making that what did you see on the market? What about the recent developments on the market? Yeah. Are they actually in line of the goals that we are talking about, right? Or is it way more focused on the efficiency? Because this is also the argument that you use, right? That you've very much focused on how much you spend, right?
Yeah, I think what we have sensed in the clients and in the market is that, in fact, the COVID and the inflation and the wars are bringing us to a situation, or are putting us in a situation where we don't have, with the same means that we had yesterday, we have to spend a lot more. So, like organisms that we are, we have evolved very fast into creating a solution. And like in every other crisis, we have created solutions, and there is already some, like we did create a solution around Russian energy. And we no longer depend so much on the Russian oil. And if you think about it, what it was 3 years ago or what it is today, it's incredible what we've done in such a short amount of time. Same thing as when it was with the COVID. Nobody thought that the economy will resist with people not being able to go places to work, and we did. So we adapt very fast. And in this adaptation, we saw that we can do things if we want to. The question is, we have adapted because there was a stick. Mm-hmm. I mean, if there is no Russian oil, then there is no Russian oil, and that's it. I mean, you live with it or die, but you don't want to die, so you live with it. Mm-hmm. Same thing as if you cannot get out of your place, you have to adapt to work. And then we have to create infrastructure. We were talking about infrastructure, and in fact, in real estate, the biggest problem is the infrastructure itself. Mm-hmm. I mean, to develop anything in real estate, any private investor needs infrastructure around it. In some countries, the infrastructure is linked to the sectors that are developed by private investors. In some others, the infrastructure is developed by the governments, local governments, regional governments, or national governments. We need to also create this infrastructure to be able to adapt to these times when we don't have enough oil or cheap oil, and then we have to bring in renewables. And we need to create the other infrastructure that will allow everybody to live with the salaries they have today in decent housing. So we come back again to the fact that we need to retrofit what we have that is not efficient, because there is no longer an excess of resources, and we need to make sure that the people who are building all these buildings, these new buildings, or retrofitting, do feel that somebody is backing them. The biggest problem usually when you are a developer is that there are so many guarantees and so many costs that do not depend on your willingness or your cash flow, your return on investment, but do impact the timing. So all the licensing, all the efficiency of the public service needs to be there for them. If I'm going to do something, and this is perhaps a good example, is I was talking about housing. On affordable housing or social housing, one of the advantages, and then people sometimes ask, why do people invest in social housing? It's because the certainty of the licenses. Because this, as it is promoted usually through the government, be it local or regional or national, the licenses are not challenged in the same way. Because you are servicing with real estate to a certain specific need. So this is one thing that an investor needs to look into, because in your cash flow, you know when you start, you think you know when you start, or you guess you know when you start. And from that time on, you expect to be receiving something back, the return on your investment. In a complete private situation, there is a lot of factors in there, in this timeline, that are affecting your finance into the project. In certain social, affordable, sustainable housing, sustainable is a different thing, but in social and affordable, this is not there. So if we transfer that model to the rest, I think we can create infrastructure. I think we can create more effective real estate, because investors will say, okay, well, at least I understand what is my timeline. I understand the cash flow. So if I understand the cash flow, I decide to maybe make a little bit less money, but it's secure. And this is where we can convince them.
Thank you. I have actually one more question, then nicely links to the expertise of Richard, and that's the question of the regulatory framework, and it was actually raised by Richard, the construction permits, and the issue in this country that we all know that the situation is not sufficient in terms of permitting the construction works. So how this is actually linked with the challenges that the sector is facing. Plus also one more thing, the new technologies that eventually might be used in the construction and in development, such as recycled concrete or other materials. How you perceive this as something that could contribute in more efficiency and in building advanced buildings, and to what extent you see it as an obstacle in terms of the regulation that it is now is probably way too strict that the sector would expect?
I think it's working well. What we see is that we see every day new ways of doing the old buildings, and these new ways are actually very good and more efficient. We see new materials, we see new technologies coming in, and I think the licensing of those materials and novelties in the way of construction, it's very fast. I don't think anybody wants, I mean, of course there's a scrutiny, you have to look into it, somebody has to do the normalization of all this across countries, but I don't think this is there's a blocker in here. I think the blocker is more on how to finance these new technologies while they are not so cheap. You know, when they comes in, there's not so many investors into those new technologies, because once it is at that scale, everybody comes in. I don't think this is a problem. Okay. On the contrary, probably this is actually bringing in more eyes to become better, and because the transfer into the pricing, it's something that basically triggers the interest of the investors.
Thank you. Ricard, would you like to react on, we just discussed the role of technologies in construction and the whole issue that you mentioned, the construction permits, and let's say a little bit more in the detail how you see it as a challenge and eventual obstacle for the projects that you mentioned?
Now you surprised me a little bit. I'm not sure if I want to dig into this topic much deeper, but it doesn't apply only on to the construction sector itself. I think the overall efficiency of the state administration has to be increased. To be honest, we are well aware of that, and I know that we have maybe too many challenges. It may seem like that, but I think that the quality of the state administration is a crucial part of a system.
Of the whole homework, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what can I say about the construction permitting? We have the new Construction Act. I must say that I'm not sure if the effectiveness of this act is from this year or maybe next year. However, I hope that the work was conducted well, not only by the state administration but also by the legislators, and that this reform will help to solve this issue of permitting.
Thank you. I'm looking at the questions that we already have in Slido, and perhaps we can link one of them to what we've been discussing with Ricard. And in your statement or your introduction, you also mentioned the new technologies that are part of the plan, and you mentioned hydrogen. Is there anything else that the plan also considers for the transition to be really of the focus of the country for investment and employing more than it is now?
First of all, it's called a plan, of course, and the plan is important especially for the infrastructure development, for long-term projects that take many years to prepare, couple of years of permitting, and then they will stay with us 20 years, 50 years. We have to rebuild the infrastructure. And the plan, I think the message is especially should focus on this infrastructure needs. Then there are, of course, the investments into renewables. There are the objectives regarding the energy efficiency in the building sector. But as I have said, we are in the market economy, and this is very much dependent, not on the state. We just may use the subsidies. We may set this, let's say, vision for these sectors, but it's on the private sector to prepare the projects and to make them live. I mean, in that sense, it's not our role to set up a very concrete plan in each technology and in each industrial field where you should invest. The market has to know. The companies should set their climate goals, the decarbonization goals. They should have the assessment of what technologies are fit for purpose for their enterprise, and of course it's a matter of money as well, and how much money they have, what kind of financing they can get from the financial sector. This is something that will shape what kind of technologies will be applied. But what the National Climate Plan or what the vision is, that it's sort of a message. Think of your future investments that they have to be climate-proofed. You have to think about it. I mean, yeah, I could take a list here and say, let's say that we suppose quite large amounts of investments into heating pumps. You know, and then I would go sector from sector, and there are different technologies in the manufacturing sector. So I think this is something that should be left still on the market, but we see they have to look at the decarbonisation pathways for each sector and think about what they can do within their own own field.
Thank you very much, Richard.
And maybe what is also important. It's also a matter of the possibilities. I'm glad that Raoul has mentioned the just transition, in fact, and this is something that is a challenge as well, of course. Not only the low-income households, but also the small and medium enterprises and so on.
Thank you for this. Talking about what you mentioned, it must be market-driven, right? So where the supply and demand meet. Helen, what would you say? What is the low-hanging fruits in this regard when it comes to the private funding? What do you think is most feasible if we look at what will be happening in the upcoming years?
Well, we are very much focused on impact. And impact means that your money, be it from a retail investor or a financial institution, changes the situation. If you grow biological carrots, you know where your impact is. If you have money, it is indirect impact. And this is very key to understand where progress is to be done in the financial sector. If you take into account impact and you want to grow impact, I think a great avenue of progressing in the next years is engagement. How compatible transition plans of financial institutions or strategies, environmental strategies, let's call them like that, of financial institution fit with their clients. Financial institutions have a very large power in engaging with their with the companies they finance, with the companies they support, and it is key to grow impact that they use this power. Stakeholder engagement is for us a key success key for the future. We have been discussing this in France extensively in the last months because there was a law that was discussed and finally abandoned, sadly, to make it mandatory for large companies to disclose their engagement, well, their I don't know the English word, or their resolutions, their General Assembly resolutions linked to environment every 3 years. This was only disclosure for large financial institutions every 3 years. This doesn't look that big a deal, but still it was rejected and hardly lobbied. I think financial institutions must now take action and really take action to disclose every year what they are doing to their clients, to their stakeholders, and have a reasonable engagement policy with their clients. This is where impact will grow, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Rob, would you like to react on what's been
Yeah, I
discussing?
think it's completely right. People go to banks for money. They go to financiers for money. If the money givers are telling you, okay, I give you if, then the if is what makes more sense. And they're already doing it. They're doing quite well. There's a lot to do because it sometimes happens that you go to the bank and the bank doesn't understand all the aspects in the business. So they need to, and this is actually asked in the regulatory frameworks, in the disclosure regulatory frameworks, to be more specific on the impacts that are before and after this financing takes place. And with a little bit of practice and a little bit of communication over the best practices, I think we can learn quite fast. But we need to have this communication. We need to see that.
I would say it is not only communication, it is also engagement, and truly, truly objective engagement, not only communication.
So also the whole knowledge about understanding, right, what the impact is, and the... Okay, thank you. I'm looking, we still have, I would say, 15 minutes left, so I would probably draw our attention to the questions that we have. Perhaps I would, for the first one that we see is on the screen for Ricard, how can be the decarbonization process influenced by the consumers and customers as the demand side of the economy? I think you already touched upon that, right? As the question between the demand and supply, and then the companies to decide what eventually could drive the demand. I would like to add something else on that.
Yeah, that is a good question. Can we consume ourselves to sustainability? Of course, there's a role of everybody, but let's say that at least my personal opinion on that topic is that the best way is to be eventually publicly active and politically active in the sense that you choose or vote for, or that you, as a you know, the decarbonization is very much an infrastructure problem. You can choose in the market, and it's a good way to think about the climate change in your everyday life. However, if that does not transpose into your, for example, in your profession, what you're doing in your profession and the decisions that you make in your profession, if you, for example, if you are at some higher managerial level, etc., or if that doesn't transpose then into your political opinions, and or your public involvement with your friends about the topic, it won't help that much. Maybe I'm not on mainstream kind of point of view on that, but as I said, this is my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. There is also the comment or not? On what's been said. So there is another actually question, very interesting one for Raul. Is there any chance in the future for each household rely completely on renewable sources of energy, respectively only on their own renewable sources? What is the attitude on the market, also for the developers and construction companies? What they are maybe prioritizing? Is it actually possible?
I think technology-wise it is. As I said before, I think there's already been produced net zero housing, and there is a lot of knowledge around it. And if you look into the different labels and certifications around, they're working towards that. So yeah, technology is there, not yet for everybody. So the part that says for each household is a bit, it relies on two things. First, that somebody will produce it, and then somebody will buy it, or somebody will like to have it. Some of those technologies may be not known to everybody, so they will not know how to operate maybe a small or a unit to have the renewable energy in your household, and they don't want the hassle. So is it there? Yes. Do I want it? Yes. Can I use it? Maybe not. So there is also this element that you need to have the people educated towards that, and then is how the question about the expense. It is expensive. It's a bit more expensive, or a lot more expensive, depending on which technologies you use and where you live. But I think it's with a little bit of finance and a little bit of regulation behind, we are working towards this already. And I think if we talk about one house, it's more feasible than if we talk about one building, because buildings are a little bit more, like imagine this building in the university, within some time and money, it could be done as well. But obviously it's going to be more difficult to heat up in winter something in Prague than it will be heating it in Madrid. But then you will have, so there's a lot of things to take into consideration. I think then again comes back to the attitude of the people around, the stakeholders around those buildings or those households.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Perhaps one more question that is linked to what we discussed, and Ricard touched it upon at the beginning, and then in the priorities, is the heating infrastructure, which is, I would say, very complex issue, right? So the question is, what do you think is more effective, decentralizing heating distribution or decarbonising centralized heating distribution?
I'm not able to say what is more effective. Like in each sense, what I try to stress is that we have to look at our power dependency, and it's obvious that in the Czech Republic we have central heating distribution systems already. They are here, and transforming them into individual heating from day to day is not possible. So in that sense, we have to look what we can do with these systems and what kind of vision we can set forward in the terms of the decarbonization. As I've said, some of them already switched to gas. The investment lifetime of gas is something I think above 20 years. It may be more. So it's about, let's say, again, it's about looking more into the future than just a couple of next years. We can we also have to look at other possibilities for the systems that now rely on coal. Some of them may be switched to gas also, but we do not want to be dependent too much on gas, of course. It's still a fossil fuel, even though in the long term, and that is a question, in the long run, let's say in 20 years, there will be carbon capture and storage, and some of the facilities may be modernized with that. But again, then it is the question of the economics that we do not know now. It's that the carbon capture and storage now seems some sort of as a science fiction technology, but this is the progress is about this. It may happen that the technology will get much cheaper in let's say 10 years. And we will see the possibilities then again, and we will be in some point of the lifetime of these central heating facilities, and then we will reassess, or the operators will reassess what kind of future they see for this central heating facilities, and also, of course, there are possibilities to switch to large industrial heat pumps. But at the same time, at the climate conditions of the Czech Republic, there still remains a challenge how to deal with winter months, which then, yeah, it's a technical question. There have been conducted some piloting projects in the Czech Republic. And that is, I think, what I can say about that. It's not a set-up plan. The plan is that we have to find solutions for the central heating systems. Some of them are there, and the different enterprises, different operators of a heating system will choose different ways. But what is clear is that keeping sources on coal after 2030 will not be profitable in any way. That is what we know for sure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for explaining this. It's pretty complex, right? The challenges that we are facing when it comes to the heating infrastructure, and at the same time the changing environment or devolving, right? The sector that might also change the supplies of heating depending on what is actually available. Actually, there is a question by Martin Špolc for Helen, but I actually have I actually had this similar idea about what we discussed, the engagement and the role of the financial institutions, and then way more attention towards the knowledge and so on. So I was just wondering, and perhaps I will link that with the question that Martin is asking, are there any champions or really cases to follow when we look at the EU comparison of some of the countries or some of the maybe products or some specific cases where we can really see that this has a potential and this is what we can learn from, and that goes with the question to ensure greater and better engagement of retail investors. Would you consider useful to develop more standards for products and instruments?
Maybe a slight remark before answering these two questions, and thank you for them. We should not expect everything from retail investors. I want to remind that it is first and foremost financial institutions that should act, engage, commit to impact. But when retail investors want to engage, of course, they need to be guided on a secure way. Labels, standards are a way. But we have seen standards that have been quite disappointed in the past. We have a very famous label in France, ISR, which has been which people happen to understand that this was not a green label. It is a sustainable label. This is labeled sustainable, but it is not a green label, and this is a communication bias that needs to be annihilated. I mean, consumers do not want to be guided on a wrong way, and there are champions. I think we can, and there are several examples of thematic funds, impact funds. But I think the point is that they need to communicate what they can deliver only. I mean, if you do not save the Amazonian forest while decarbonizing the Czech Republic housing system, fine. Just do whatever you do. Tell whatever you do. Don't tell you're saving the world. You are not. Maybe you finance decarbonizing housing in Czech Republic, and that is fine. People need clarity, simplicity, and real engagement from financial institutions.
Thank you very much.
I'm thinking how that goes along what I'm saying, that that the private sector have to deal with that also. But yeah, but you can see that but there is something what I wanted to say, that I agree with you when you put the focus on to the centers. I mean the financial sector. I'm putting focus on the infrastructure, but of course in everyday life or in your small enterprise, or the question, where should I invest? What kind of technologies I should choose? I mean, for that we have a taxonomy. Yes. You can run through the taxonomy and have a look what kind of investments and on what criteria, what conditions are there for these investments, but you have to make it work for your case.
Okay, good. Looking at time, we unfortunately don't have a capacity to go through all the questions. So I have here a closing one before perhaps closing the whole conference. If we look at the outlook, either for the sector or the role of the private investors, or the whole country, what would you see is the outlook for, let's say, upcoming 10 years? What do you think is going to drive the whole transition? And how would you think this will affect the sector, the decision-making of the investors, what would be the availability of the products, and so on, and then how the country will look like eventually in 10 years? I know it's a very challenging question, but we don't have the crystal ball. But perhaps if you can elaborate a bit on what is giving the the evolution of the transition, or how it's been evolving in the last couple of years, and what is the potential that we see, taking into consideration the regulations that we have and the homework that needs to be done on national level. Who would like to be the first?
Okay.
Ladies first.
Oh, thank you. No, as you say, we have no crystal ball, unfortunately. What we see really emerging in the discussions right now is biodiversity and other environmental objectives. That were the 6 environmental objectives altogether. The focus was really much on climate so far, and this has been elaborated a lot. Now we need to put all six environmental objectives at the same level of attention and at the same level of expertise for the financial sector. So I think this will shape the discussion for the next years, probably.
Okay, thank you. Richard?
I will now point out not the investments and the money. I would like to see that in 10 years that the know-how and the knowledge of what is sustainability will improve in our country, and that is what is it about, that people understand it, that they are educated in their fields what sustainability is, that they understand it, that they do not see it as a challenge, and then there wouldn't be maybe so many, let's say, problems with having been reliant on consultancy for everything, etc. I think that the whole society. And it will take years, maybe generations, of course, but we have to prepare for that the common understanding of a sustainability will have to become the part of, let's say, our common human knowledge, because that is what it is about, and that is the vision I would like to see that progresses in 10 years.
Thank you.
Wow, how about you? Completely. And somebody was asking before what was the mistakes that we have realized with the time. And I think this is one of the mistakes, that we have not focused enough on education, changing the mindset. And perhaps because we are not educated enough, we look into everything and we don't look into specifics. Because if we knew enough, we will look into specifics, focus on it, find solutions, apply. But because we don't have enough education, and it could be maybe we in this room do, but when you go to the big companies, they don't have enough education, and because they are under the water, because there is not enough people, because there is not enough money, because. So somehow, hopefully in the next few years, the education will pour down to all the people, all the actors, and then we will find these specific targets and work towards the targets. Meanwhile, fortunately or unfortunately, there will be people who, like us, will have to drive the companies and the individuals towards those specific items. But I think it's a question of education, really.
Okay, thank you very much. It seems that we found a consensus, right? Which is good news, and I think it's very optimistic. So first of all, thank you very much to our panelists, to Helen Lanier, Richard Juřík, and Raul Garcia Gonzalez for joining us for this panel. It was very inspiring. Thank you again for finding time and coming and joining us at this event. And perhaps to just close very briefly the conference, thank you also for joining us today, and also those of you who've been watching or will be watching this event later online, because it will be saved on our YouTube channel. And also our gratitude goes to the partners of the conference, the representation of the European Commission, and also Hospodářské noviny and Euractiv. Also at this point, I would like to invite you to the networking and reception, which will be happening next door. And that's it. Now I'm closing the conference, and let's continue with informal talk. So thank you again, and have a nice evening.